Well, on to General Motors now as the company is pushing Unifor to pull its Super Bowl ad. The commercial by the union is highly critical of the company and its expansion in Mexico and threatens to bring the campaign to save the Oshawa assembly plant to the biggest sporting event of the year.
When GM needed help, we gave them $300 from every single Canadian. And after that nearly $11 billion bailout, GM continues to expand in Mexico, leaving workers out in the cold. A move that says...
Now, that is just part of the ad slated to run during the Super Bowl tonight. CBC News has reached out to General Motors Canada, and in a statement, this is what GM says. Quote, Unifor knows that GM Canada repaid its 2009 loans in full and that the restructured GM fulfilled all the terms of its agreements with the Canadian government many years ago. Since 2009, GM Canada has contributed over $100 billion to the Canadian economy, including $8 billion invested into workers' pensions. Well, for more on this, we're now reaching out to Unifor's national president. Jerry Dias joins us on the phone right now. Jerry, thank you for joining us today. A bit of a timeline here because GM sent this letter to Unifor on Friday, and the deadline in the letter quoted was yesterday. Unifor has still not pulled the ad. Why?
Why would we? I mean, the reality is General Motors is abandoning Oshawa. They put a heck of a spin on the amount of money they spent in Canada, but the simple reality is we're on the cusp of building under 200,000 cars a year for General Motors, while Canadians buy over 300,000. So they can't get away from the fact that they're going to cost 24,000 Canadians their jobs, and it'll have a negative impact of about $1 billion a year on the economy. So I'm not going to be threatened by General Motors. I'm not going to be intimidated by General Motors. They can bring in all the lawyers they want. It's not going to change the narrative. And the narrative is very, very straightforward. If they want to sell here, then they have to build here. And it isn't any more complicated than that.
Well, as we say, the letter that was sent out by GM set the deadline of yesterday, February the 2nd, as the day to pull the ad. That hasn't happened. So we reached out to GM, and they tell us right now that they have no further statements pertaining to the missed deadline. Have they reached out to you since yesterday, Jerry?
No, they have not, and I don't expect that they will. They'll have their lawyers do their talking for them, and frankly, we're going to have consumers speaking for us.
I want to go through some of the arguments that GM is making in its letter. And this is what the company lawyers say in that letter to Unifor. They say, first and foremost, that your ad contains false and misleading material. They also argue that the government did not give GM billions of dollars. It was a loan that was paid back with interest, paid back with shares, and that Unifor, they say, is using imprecise and misleading language in this ad. In fact, this is what they state. They go on to say these statements are not only false, but are designed to intentionally and maliciously mislead Canadian consumers and tarnish GM's reputation with them, forever tarnish GM's reputation. What do you say to that, Jerry? Are you misleading Canadians by ratcheting up your arguments?
Not at all. The reality is that GM is harming themselves. GM has put themselves in this predicament. General Motors signed an agreement with us in September of 2016 that said there would be no closures during the life of the agreement. The whole set of negotiations was all about GM and Oshawa, and at the end of the day, they committed not to close the operations. So for them to announce in November of 2018 that they're closing the plant is a complete slap in the face. If you take a look at GM's profits, 90% of all of their global profits are in Canada and the United States. So they are slapping the consumers that are making them the most money. Now, they can't deny the fact that in 2009, they took an $11 billion. They took $11 billion from the Canadian government. The Canadian government got shares. The Stephen Harper government sold the shares for a loss. But they can't get away from the fact that they took this money from the government when they needed it the most, and the government at that time made the right decision. But the whole argument is that they have shifted away from production in Canada. They're closing Oshawa at the same time that they're investing billions of dollars in Mexico. Their GM operations in Mexico are on the cusp of building over 1 million vehicles a year, while Mexican consumers buy 240,000. Where did those jobs come from? Where did the volume come from? Much of it came from Canada. So they can't get away from the facts. They can spin it any way they want. But we were there for them when they needed us the most, and they're not there for us today.
But GM is not doing anything illegal by closing down the assembly plant. The argument has been made because it's not just Oshawa, but also plants in the United States were shut down as GM restructures here.
Canada is taking an inappropriate hit. as it relates to the percentage of the volume they're taking out of the North America or the Canada U.S. industry. So we are getting hit a lot harder here in Canada than they are in the United States. So what they're doing is illegal? No, but it certainly violates the terms of the collective agreement that they signed just 2.5 years ago. So what they are doing may not be illegal, but it violates our collective agreement. But I'll argue that it's highly immoral. That is a fact.
Now, if your intent here, though, is to keep jobs in this country and get more jobs at the GM plant in Canada, are you afraid, now that there's this letter, are you afraid that your strategy is actually backfiring?
Not in the least. As a matter of fact, I'll argue that our facilities are probably safer today. Why? Because GM had no intention, in my opinion, of staying in the long term. If you take a look at what happened in Ingersoll just in 2017, we had a strike for over a month where we're trying to get them to commit that our Equinox, we would be the primary producer of that that product. At the end of the day, we were unsuccessful having GM make that commitment, and they're building the Equinox in 2 assembly plants in Mexico. So my argument is, if in fact there's a reduction of the Equinox, will they take it out of plants where they pay their employee $2 an hour, or will they take it out of Ingersoll? And the fact that they are only going to be building one vehicle in Canada, to me, it has disaster written all over it for the long term. So am I nervous? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. Are you nervous, though, about further legal action? Because also in that letter, GM essentially says that it is willing to pursue legal action as well as looking at reparative action concerning the hit the company takes.
I am not concerned about it in the least. They are not going to silence the fact that we are fighting for 24,000 Canadians. They may want to silence us, but it's not going to work. This is not going to be resolved in a courtroom. This is going to be resolved at the bargaining table. And General Motors understands that. So if, in fact, they're trying to intimidate us, it's failing miserably because they are not intimidating us, and they are not going to have us change our course. GM committed in 2016 not to close the plant, and that's exactly what they want to do. So they have to have some responsibility for their actions. But this isn't the first time GM has done it to us. In 2008 bargaining, we just ratified the agreement, and then they announced the closure of the truck plant. Never raised it. In 2012 bargaining, we raised with them. There was noise about the Camaro going to the United States. They totally denied it. Months later, they moved the Camaro to the United States. 2016, they committed that there would be no closures during the life of the agreement, and here we are today having this argument. So this is a company that has been anything but straightforward, and when GM starts to say about what their long-term commitment is for Canada, I just take a look at their actions. I don't listen to their words.